Hello and welcome to A Fuller Understanding on the Auteur Limits. I am your host as ever, Craig, and joining me is my co-host Robert Beams. Hello, Robert Beams.
Hello, Craig.
I
Hello, how are
thought
you today?
that was good. I thought that would make you chuckle using your whole name. I don't know why, but I sat down and I thought I'll use his whole name and he'll chuckle. How are you today?
Yeah, very good, very good. Looking forward to delving into our second episode on this fuller journey to fuller understanding.
Yeah. As Rob rightly points out, this is the second film. We're working through Samuel Fuller's films in chronological order, which means that we have no choice but discuss the Baron of Arizona in this particular.
You set it up nicely there. Yeah, this isn't a good film, but it's an interesting film. There are interesting things about it.
It is, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's a bad film particularly, but
Yeah.
it's not a good film.
I I was thinking about this morning because the previous one we did, which listeners might remember, was the Kurosawa cast, and I think, like, with the exception of maybe two or three, all of Kurosawa's films are vying for greatness. Like, I don't think they're all great. I just mean that, like, if somebody said, you know what, Dersu Azala is my favorite film of all time, and I think it's great, it wouldn't be like risible. Whereas, no, this is nobody's favorite film. And I think it's interesting because, obviously, like we talked about the first episode, I've seen some of Fuller's greatest films. I've already seen Steel Helmet, I've seen Shot Corridor, Crimson Kimono, and those ones are all really good. So I know the highs are quite high, but the lows, I think, are in a different kind of camp to what we're dealing with Kurosawa.
Yeah, definitely.
This is not like an art, this is not an auteur's art film, in the same sort of way.
And you said camp, meaning is in a different sort of in camp as in a different genre almost. That's a better word than genre. But I heard the camp as in camp classic, and there's quite a lot of camp to this film actually. I think
there is, yeah, I think so. Vincent Price, who's the lead, is certainly sort of he's got quite a camp way about him, isn't he? Actually,
yeah.
Kind of in it as he plays this forger. Do you want me to summarize what this film's about?
Well, should I just set up to begin with just a little bit of context to begin
yeah,
with?
Please do.
So yeah, so this is the second film. At this point, Samuel Fuller's quite a hot property actually after the success of I Shot Jesse James, which is his sleeper hit.
mentioned that it even got some prizes and got some notices last time.
Yeah. So he's kind of Robert Lippert, his producer, is well behind him, and he gives him a budget 3 times that of I Shot Jesse James to make his follow-up film. And Samuel Fuller kind of settles on this story about somebody who submits a fraudulent claim to the whole of Arizona that he'd picked up in a bar during his traveling with hobos days in New Mexico. So he picks up the story, and much like I Shot Jesse James, he kind of largely fictionalizes the story and changes some names, but takes the bones of the story. So that's where we are with it. He's got a few. I'll come into some more details later. So, yeah, if you want to start off with the story, let's go with that.
Yeah, sure. I want to mention, because Lippert, I'm getting this sense Lippert is a little bit of a kind of a classic kind of low rent huckster, like a showman who wants to kind of titillate people slightly, right? Almost like when Howard Hughes with The Outlaw and stuff like that. Is it in that ballpark?
Definitely. I mean,
because
Sam Fuller mentions in his biography here that there's these kind of, he talks about David Selznick was producing Dostoevsky's The Idiot at MGM. Paramount was making Dickens' Oliver Twists, and Lippert wanted to produce an adaptation as well. So this was from an article published in the American Weekly. So this was his literary adaptation from a magazine.
Because the reason I bring that up is because I was sort of set up to fail immediately, probably like the audience was who saw this in 1950, by the fact that the poster has a very sort of a bit like Howard Hughes with The Outlaw, has a lot of sort of like buxom women bearing their sort of cleavages on it. It has a picture, obviously, of the guy with a gun, and it says, "The lustiest adventure a man ever lived" is the tagline. Now, I took from that sort of a modern maybe meaning of what I take from lusty. I've looked up lustiest to see if there's a different meaning. Apparently it just means healthy, strong, and full of vigor. So I guess maybe, but it didn't. It didn't. I don't think this is a particularly lusty movie.
No, not particularly.
Basically, it has hands down the worst and most boring setup for any movie I've ever seen in my life. It starts with a kind of the opposite of the Star Wars title crawl, more like the Star Wars prequels title crawl. You know, the first prequel is like taxation, you know, sort of in that vein, because it starts off with a card that's like, the state of Arizona is being ratified and we're having dinner at the governor's house to celebrate, or some bullshit. And then it cuts to this framing device that gets abandoned about half an hour, 40 minutes in. This framing device just gets completely abandoned. I thought we might pick up with it again at the end, but no, they just forget it happened. So it starts with this framing device where this guy's telling the story. You get these really boring men in the room. It's like 6 just boring old dudes in a room. And they literally, and this kind of paints the picture for how the dialogue is through the whole film. They literally say things like, "I'm really glad the state of Arizona has just been ratified." Like they just say like stuff like that. That wasn't an exact quote, but it's like that. And then this guy's like, "Well, let me tell you a story." And then he starts telling the story about this guy that Vincent Price plays in these kind of what start off as these flashbacks being narrated by this guy, but that gets dropped. And he's this real life historical figure called, I think, James Revis. And it's a bit like I Shot Jesse James in that the first early sections of it seem to be quite faithful to truth. And then at a certain point, it just goes, wee! And it just goes off and it's like nothing to do. Like I read the Wikipedia page for this guy, and the film and the Wikipedia page have so little overlap that it, you know. But anyway, so this guy, he's a forger. He forges.
I just wanted to point out though, the revised final shooting script didn't contain that scene, so it seems like that was something added to sort of help people through the plot, basically.
Right, interesting.
But it wasn't originally intended, I don't think.
Okay, that's interesting. So yeah, so you get this you get this set up, you get this guy, he's a forger. He basically grooms this little girl into being, like, in two senses of the word, into being one, this kind of baroness that she's not, and convincing her and the people looking after her that she's this baroness, and secondly by marrying her as soon as she's of age so he can be a baron. And then it's just his adventures sort of forging documents. The first sort of, I don't know, third of it is like Catch Me If You Can, and he's going around doing all these capers. But then it settles into this weird thing where he's traveling with like Roma people in Spain for ages. And then it becomes this completely different thing where it becomes this like love story melodrama, which is kind of what happens with I Shot Jesse James as well. And it basically ends in a way that's not true to reality, where this guy's sort of like, you know what? Love changed my mind. And I'm going to confess to all my crimes and not have the state of Arizona now. And he narrowly escapes a lynching. There's this kind of, everything gets resolved, but then there's like a kind of just, we need some action. So there's like this lynching and gunfire and people barricading themselves into rooms and all this kind of thing. And that action ends as abruptly as it starts. Like you kind of get, like it kind of happens when the film kind of feels like it's reached a resolution. And then it ends really, really jankily with him like in a noose going like, "You've got to keep me alive." And then it just cuts to like newspaper, the Baron is in prison. You know what I mean? Yeah. and we got that from I Shot Jesse James as well, right? All these like newspapers coming up. And in this, you get a few newspapers, you get some of those like town hall kind of notices, you get these like stories coming up on like, what do they call that? The kind of ticker.
Ticker tape, yeah.
Yeah, like the ticker tape thing. Yeah, you get these kind of things being wired through. So he likes the Sam Fuller already. I can't remember from Steel Helmet and stuff whether he continues with this, but currently his kind of news hound roots. Yeah, he's 2 for 2.
2 for 2. We're gonna. Well, I think we should keep score as we go along.
So yeah, that's basically it. I mean, I will obviously talk about it in detail through the film, but basically, con man, he goes to Spain, which never happened in real life, to forge these documents in a monastery for a while. There's some kind of false action there as well, where there's a car chase involving one car, essentially, where like he runs off on a horse and cart. It's almost like a Mel Brooks movie. Kind of cuts to the police kind of going, Oh, I wonder what he's up to. Anyway, we came to talk to you about the roads. Yeah, we fixed the potholes or whatever. And then it cuts back to him on a horse and cart, like furiously racing away, and he crashes, and like the cart explodes and rolls down a hill, and it's a chase of one man, and he kind of has this caper, and then yeah, the rest of the film kind of becomes a little bit of a melodrama. But that's basically the sweep of it.
Yeah.
What were your high level thoughts? Because you said it's not bad, which I'm interested in.
I think it's really like disjointed, but I think there's pleasures to be had in it, and there are sections that are interesting. I agree with you. The opening is terrible, and the level of dialogue is like, well, you should know as the governor of this place, and it's that sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I want to say, I've got a few quotes. There's one where a bunch of guys burst into his office, and it's the guy that played the troubadour in I Shot Jesse James, who plays kind of the lead rabble rouser, because I recognized him from somewhere and I had to look it up, and that's where he's from. And he bursts in at one point to the guy's office and said, "I'm a landowner. We all are." And there's another bit where I've got some other quotes in here. I'll get to them as they come up, but there's a bit where he rides into town, and there's all these people gathered around discussing how much they don't like the guy who's going to take all their land. And this guy in this real like stereotypical old west pose, like leaning on his knee, just says something like, "That's a funny carriage," in a really weird way. And they have this kind of, again, all the dialogue is really really kind of plain, isn't it? Very kind of plain spoken, just like.
I mean, it doesn't get any worse than it does in the opening scenes, though. I think it puts the worst of the dialogue out on Front Street in that really awful scene. Plus, you're given the entire plot, and you know that this guy's going to fail from the off, which is not necessarily a problem, but
well, I guess that's unavoidable. If he's trying to claim that he's the Baron of Arizona and you live in the world and you know that there isn't Baron of Arizona, you're sort of like, okay, this can't work.
That's true, but he might get hold of it for a little while. He comes very close, doesn't he?
He turns down 25 million, which is a stupid thing.
Which must be, I don't know how much that would have been worth back in 18 whenever. Did you recognise Griff?
I didn't, no.
Would you recognise him in a top hat with a beard?
Possibly. I have no idea. I can't picture his face enough to know. Griff, by the way, is the forger who's trying to demonstrate that he's a crook, isn't he? He's the guy trying to unmask him.
Yeah, he's played by Reed Hadley, who is Jesse James.
Right.
In I Shot Jesse James, yeah.
Right. He was familiar. This film had a few faces in it that were familiar, and I couldn't tell whether they were familiar because they were actually famous or because they were in I Shot Jesse James. And it seems to turn out most of the time that it's the latter. There is one actor in it I recognised, Ellen Drew, who plays the grown-up version of the young girl who's being kind of made to believe she's a countess. She's in a few very good films. She's in Christmas in July, the Preston Sturges film, which is very funny. She's very funny in that. And she's also in the film that inspired Tokyo Story, in some places kind of beat for beat. She's got a role in Make Way for Tomorrow, which is a Liam McCarry film from the late 30s. But apart from that, this cast is a bit like I Shot Jesse James, is not very starry, is it? Well, Vincent Price. So we've got the upgrade of Vincent Price, I guess.
Vincent Price, yeah. So I was looked into sort of where Vincent Price was at this point. So Vincent Price wasn't actually known quite yet as a
horror man.
No, he'd done a couple of Invisible Man films, but it's not really until 1958, so 10 years later, that he makes The Fly, and then from there on in,
that's a Lippert as well, isn't it?
I think it might well.
Yeah, because I looked at Lippert on Letterboxd, and The Fly was his most famous film that he produced.
And then from there on, then it's like House of Haunted Hill, Return of the Fly, The Tingler, The Bat, House of Usher, Pit and the Pendulum. It's like you straight him. So he's not the kind of he's not got all that horror baggage at this point. Vincent Price. He's actually second choice for the role. Behind Frederick March.
I know Frederick March.
Who, for whatever reason, couldn't do it. And then Sam Fuller sees Vincent Price in a play on Broadway and goes back behind the scenes and speaks to him. What does he say? There's a nice little bit in the in the biography.
While you look for that, I was going to say, I'm so surprised to hear he wasn't already known in some way for horror, because the first time we see him is this like sudden close up in like a thunderstorm with this kind of dramatic flurry of music. And I thought like, oh, they're saying, this is Vincent Price, you know, this is this guy. But apparently not. That must just be baggage I'm bringing in.
Well, one of the things, there's definitely a gothic look to it, and I think that opening scene, after you get past the kind of the setup, the taxation of trade routes, it's got a really nice look to it, and a lot of that comes from a cinematographer called James Wong Howe, who's kind of a bit of like a slightly unsung cinematographer and sort of pioneering kind of Chinese American cinematographer, who was a real coup for the film. So at this point, he's already been Academy Award nominated 5 times, and is about to win his first of 2 in 1955. He shot so the most well-known films would be probably HUD and Funny Lady.
Sweet Smell of Success as well.
Sweet Smell of Success, yeah.
And Frankenheimer's Seconds. Yeah, he's got a very, very good filmography.
So, and I think there are bits in here that are really nice, like that rain in the doorway scene. To begin with, the introduction's really nice. You start to get those kind of moving shots. So there's a shot where during the extended grooming sequence, which, you know,
it was a different time.
It was a different time. Like Sam Fuller writes about it. Like, I mean, he falls in love with her when she's of age, because we wanted to get past any of the pervert stuff. There's this bit where she comes in and she wants a story, and it kind of follows her in, and then she comes around and sits next to him, and then we sort of push in to a 2-shot, and then we push into like even further to a close up of the title of the book, and the book is about forgery. It's like how to be a massive forger, and he's reading a story about
fairy tales pretending.
Basically. But you start to see from those static 1-shots, we're starting to see these kind of more.
I really want to talk about that bit of the book, but you were going to quote this bit about Vincent Price that I've waylaid you from.
It's he goes. He had an. I saw a tall actor on a Broadway play with a dignified appearance of an old world gentleman. He had an impressive voice and all the gestures and movements of a bygone era. Just the guy I needed. And they talks about going backstage to Spaker's Cars, and I noticed the expressiveness. He's got this weird kind of what his eyebrows do, or the twitches, or the kind of, it's like the top half of his face sort of dances almost. It's sort of so many.
There's a scene later in the film, I've written it down somewhere, I can't remember exactly what happens. Oh yeah, it's when someone tells him that he's the man who changed geography, and you kind of get this push in on him, and it's like this close up, and he just kind of arches an eyebrow and looks very happy with himself, and it's such a great little moment facially. But back to that scene you talked about in the book, I thought that was possibly the smartest scene in the whole film, because a lot of it is very sort of oratory of people going, "I'm a landowner," and in that scene you actually kind of, you're getting told that this guy is this con man, this forger, this unreliable guy, but you're getting shown it from the contradiction between what she thinks she's being read and the story he's spinning, but also the confirmation of what this book is that he's reading that shows that obviously he's a big con artist and a forger. It's a really smart moment, because what would usually happen in this film was someone would come in and go, "You're reading a book called Forgery of..." That's not what happens.
Yeah, and then there's this handbrake turn, like the first of a couple, where they all of a sudden he's in. So there's, I think one of the reasons why that scene at the beginning was because this is like it is a plot-driven film. There's always like a goal and something that needs to be done, and it's never particularly clear and not always particularly interesting, because a lot of it has to do with certain types of ink or
not always
books.
Not always is a very kind way of putting it.
So I think that, you know, it is quite, if you drop the thread, you don't necessarily have the will to pick it up. But it handbrakes, and he goes off to Spain to pretend to be a monk for a little while. So
can I just say, like, this is really more obvious to, I know it's probably obvious to everyone, but as someone who lives in Spain, it's even more incongruous how American all the Spanish people are. Like, they've kind of taken the Hunt for Red October approach, which is fine, but then they also have like a kind of a comedy foreigner Mexican guy who's like, "Oh, but Mr. Rivas, the Baron," but then everyone else in Spain is just like, "Well, as a Spanish monk, welcome to Spain, sir. Hey, go see Friar Gregory. This is where we keep the books. And then all of the kind of Roma people are the same as well. Like, hey, welcome to our camp. It's very, very odd. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so he goes and he has to try and get hold of this book, and he has to play the sort of the long game, and he's there for a while. That's where it
3 years.
3 years, and it's really quite gothic at this point. Like, look, books chained up, and there's a book that he needs to get, but there might be another copy, and somebody else might have it, and you kind of dance around this monastery for a little while. And although it looks very pretty, and you can see where the extra money's gone, because we've already had these 3 different locations, and the sets are more expressive. It does kind of kill the momentum dead a little bit.
It does, and this idea as well that this guy who's kind of in some ways responsible for this girl back home in America and everything, that the revelation that he's been in this monastery pretending to be a monk for 3 years comes as a bit comic to me, especially because he's gotten like really not very far in his con at that point either, because he's not even got to the book yet, and he's like carrying rocks outside, and he's pretending he doesn't want to work in the library, and it's like, you've been carrying rocks for 3 years. It's like, this guy's moving very slowly for someone who a scene later is going to be really hasty and move very quickly.
Yeah. I also got a little note at this point that I thought he looked a little bit like Adam Driver when he was young as well. He's got quite a long face.
Something that really I wasn't expecting, because my first introduction to Vincent Price, like a lot of people probably of my generation, is more through Tim Burton and through Edward Scissorhands and stuff like that. And the kind of pop culture idea of Vincent Price as an older actor is very gaunt. It's very drawn and thin.
Oh no, he's
and
quite
kind of
hench,
thing.
isn't he?
He's a big boy, Vincent Price, in these films.
Yeah.
That really surprised me, seeing how sort of he's a full. I don't want to say he's like a heavy set gentleman, but he's a full man, isn't he? He's a very sort of big bloke.
And I think even at this point, I mean, it's difficult. We can't separate him from all that horror baggage, but he has got this kind of gothic southern, well, maybe not southern, but he's got this gothic gentleman charm to him. That is kind of, that does fit the role, I think, quite well. But yeah, so he finds out there's another book, and it's kind of been kept at this Marquis's house, and then they rumble him somehow, don't they, as well? So he steals this horse and goes off the cliff because he's going too fast for no reason. No one's chasing him. It's quite a good stunt, but he kind of gets thrown from this horse. And then he's picked up by a group of gypsies who look after him. And he basically says to them, I can't remember the exact thing, but he basically says, this Marquis, it's not exact this, but he might as well say, he called all your mum slags. Let's go and get him.
He basically does. And it was so funny because yesterday we were playing like a game online before we watched this, and I was like, is this going to be the one where he gets really problematic and like something really racist happens, and there's like going to be the N-word 50 times or something? You're like, no, I don't think we've got to worry about that. And then there's this scene turns up with the Roma people where he's basically saying like, oh, you're going to sit around here and have dirty faced children. Roma people can never be white, and all this kind of thing. And I'm kind of like, okay, you've kind of gone a strange turn here, especially because, again, none of this ever happened in real life. So this is all just Sam Fuller's like fantasy of this guy kind of meeting these people. And he becomes this kind of, this is the weird thing that happened with Jesse James as well, where I'm kind of on board with it when it's the story about Jesse James and Robert Ford and the mechanics of this kind of assassination. But then he's more interested in taking us to a place of these kind of rubbish melodramas and kind of bad romances. And like when the story goes to Spain, there's a sort of a frisson with this woman who's like the leader of the Roma people camp. And then when he goes to the mansion to steal the thing, there's a kind of a frisson with the woman there as well, and there's some suggestion they're going to run away together. And then he goes and marries the girl. There's all these like weird romances in the film that just
there is this sort of thing that goes on at this point that made me think of as a negative comparison. It made me think of Pickpocket and A Man Escaped. Although spoilers, more than one man escapes in that film, so the title's bullshit. But
but it's A Man Escaped, and the subtitle of the poster was "And Another Man Escaped."
But anyway, they do. What's really nice in there is that you've got a lot of kind of fetishized detail about how people are doing things with their hands and picking locks and pulling things out. And there's real opportunity here for like the making of the ink or the forgery or that kind of thing, or the details of these heists that doesn't really come across.
It's actually in my notes, Craig, so you don't think I'm copying you. It's in my notes. I've written Bresson before Bresson. And so I had the exact same thought, because one of my favorite things about Man Escaped and The Pickpocket is those close-ups Bresson does of people's hands just doing things. And it's exactly what you see with some of the forgery here. And it's not as elegantly done as it is with Bresson, but it's in that milieu. And that's the stuff I really liked. I think
There's
there is
not
a
enough
sort
of
of
it, though.
no,
There's just not
exactly.
enough,
There's a charm to that sort of like Catch Me If You Can type watching a guy do a con, and the film doesn't lean enough in that direction, but the bits we see of it are compelling. Like, I would happily watch scenes of him just doing the forgery and showing us how he does the forgery. More of that.
There's a joy in watching somebody who's very good at something do it well.
Yes.
And it would be nice to see more of that. And like you say, so it's about halfway through. Then we go back, and he goes to see Sophia, and she's all grown up, and he immediately proposes marriage, and she says yes.
And her guardian, who's the only guy who does have like a foreign accent in the film, is kind of I guess Mexican guy. Her guardian is like, "Oh, this is kind of problematic. Don't do that. That's a bit weird." But he kind of just goes along with it anyway, because Vincent Price gets a little bit. That's another thing that kind of comes and then is dropped, which is Vincent Price in that scene, the Baron, is almost kind of subtly threatening to that guy, isn't he? He's sort of like, "Look, you better step into line and do this fucking thing, right? Go get her." And that never comes back, because rather than it being, okay, this guy is this kind of guy, this abusive guy taking advantage of this person, the film ultimately wants to redeem him and say he was kind of saved by love, when, you know, in reality, this girl that he did this thing to died at the age of 20, you know. Like, so it's kind of this very strange thing that kind of doesn't come back. I feel like the film is not entirely consistent with what it's doing at various points, but
yeah, I mean, we'll spoil it, but like you say, it ends up being this redemptive love story that they do fall in love, and he gives it all up and goes to prison and does his penance and comes back to her, which is, it wouldn't fly in this day and age, but for some reason this is the arc that he's gone through. There's no thought about this guy's raised her since a child, and it's that's definitely outdated, to say the least.
But it's not just that, though, because the thing is, I can see that as a kind of a product of its time. But he's definitely,
and also
intentionally.
I think that is a recurring plot in a lot of sort of classic literature, isn't it? That this isn't the only example of that kind of thing.
But what I'm talking about more is that he definitely takes on a kind of threatening tone with the guy, because the guy starts to give him a little bit of resistance, and then he gets a bit threatening. And that would usually, if you saw that in like a thriller or anything, you'd think, okay, this guy's going to kick off in Act 3, because they've set him up as potentially kicking off in Act 1, you know.
Yeah,
but that never happens.
No, but it pays off in a slightly different way, doesn't it? Because he reveals that he always knew that her parents were paupers, and that she has no claim. So if you look at it through that lens, then he's basically saying this isn't a good idea. Whatever you're doing, it's clearly, you know, you're...
That's true. You got me there.
So there's that. And then all of a sudden he's got this Bond villain layer where he's now kind of working for it. So he's got this new office with a huge desk, there's a globe and a huge
really outsized map, isn't it? With
10-foot by 6-foot map of Arizona behind him,
with like really outsized labels of everything and a massive thing saying Arizona territory across the whole thing.
And he starts putting his claim in, and
there's posters and charts around the room that say things like minerals and transport and
a big train. There's a big train. Yeah, he's talking about what he's gonna do with it. And at this point, the all-American hero Griff turns up. Now, Griff is a name that you'll hear again and again in Sam Fuller's films. Refers to another GI that he was in in the war with. I haven't got the exact story in front of me, but basically Griff is like a tribute to an army friend of his, and it's a recurring thing. There's other Griffs as we go through Sam Fuller's films.
An army friend of his who didn't make it out the war,
I think so. Yeah, I might be misremembering the story. I'll look into it again for the next Griff.
Next Griff, yeah.
Yeah, and that he's played by oh god, what was his name? Reed Hadley. So Jesse James comes in. Abraham Lincoln comes in to be the big hero, and then it becomes a sort of a little bit cat and mousey as he's trying to trip him up over all these forgeries. And like you say, at the same time, the mob start getting involved because they don't want to lose all their land. And then we've got these
not the mob like the Chicago mob, just a mob.
The mob.
Yeah.
There's a great line in it as well, where one of them goes, "We don't need a baron. That's for Europe."
Yeah. I actually saw another one of the fun lines I'd written down, actually, which is there's a bit where the Baroness, where she says to him, "I don't want a dead baron. I want a live husband."
And there's not the other one I wrote down was he forbids her to do something, and she says, "I remember when you forbade me to eat more sugar." But yeah, so it kind of goes through. We get a couple of court scenes, one in an actual court, and one that's just impromptu.
Yeah,
you messaged me about this, so you talk about the court scene.
He's talking to Griff, and he's spilling his heart out and telling him, "Actually, I was a forger. You were right. This is how it all went." And suddenly Griff's like, "Just one moment, sir." And he kind of steps to the side and beckons them in. And people walk in with like a massive American flag and all these kind of court accoutrements and these kind of sheriffs. And this like judge, I guess, comes in, and they all kind of arrange this table. And Vincent Price like, "What's the meaning of this?" And it felt to me like it should have definitely spun off into a series called Home Court that just kind of had this kind of thing go on where a guy confronts, like, I don't know, like an abusive husband or something in a house. And, you know, when he starts kind of going, look, you know, kind of a bit like a Louis Theroux figure, maybe, like he's in the house kind of hearing his story and kind of chastising him gently. And then at some point he just goes, "One moment, sir." And then Home Court bursts in, and they kind of like, because he gives this spiel about how they've been empowered by the US government to set up court where and whenever they need, which sounds like the opening credits narration for Home Court as a TV series, I think. Yeah, so that's I enjoyed Home Court.
Or an early 90s dystopian science fiction.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I liked Home Court. Home Court gave me a chuckle. Like a lot of what happens in this film, I don't think it's based in reality, but I enjoyed Home Court, and I would like to see Home Court as an ongoing concern.
But yeah, I mean, like I say, it becomes this cat and mouse thing, and this is where it kind of it really loses its kind of momentum, because you kind of bounce from, I have this document. I don't think that document's real. We don't want you to be the Baron. I've got another idea. I've got this document. We don't think that document's real. We don't want you to be the Baron. And it kind of just bounces around for a little bit without really. I do like the mob. The mob are quite threatening. And there is, you know.
I think Griff, who's this expert forger who's trying to unmask him, I think there could have been a bit more cat and mouse there, and they could have played a little bit more in the grey space of how much does Griff know at this point and all this kind of thing. Whereas Griff, as soon as he meets the Baron, is like, "I know you're a forger, and I'm going to prove it, and here are the ways." And it's sort of like, I think it would have been slightly more interesting to kind of have them have a bit of a cat and mouse kind of relationship throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Which you don't get. You were saying about the mob, though.
Yeah, I think that, you know, they are quite threatening. I've got a thing for sort of
mob justice,
angry mob films. I always find them terrifying, especially in America where people have got guns and they're willing to shoot people over the. You know, you see characters who are willing to shoot people over the kind of flimsiest of reasons. I always find those.
Like trying to steal the state of Arizona.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. It is, and they are quite effective mob justice scenes. Though there is that kind of thing in films sometimes when there seems to be like a contrived misunderstanding, and that bit at the end when the sheriffs are just basically taking the Baron to jail because they've rejected his claim is when the mob comes out, and no one at any point from the sheriffs is like, "It's all right, guys, we're taking to prison. The land's yours," you know.
And
But I guess it's gone beyond that.
He talks about wanting it to make it look like a clan rally, that final scene.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. You know, the kind of the talking through the noose bit, it doesn't quite hit home. I think Lisa, what's her surname? Dabrowski. She kind of sums up all the problems with the film really, really well, in her book. So I've got a little quote here. Despite its prototypical narrative elements, The Baron of Arizona received scant critical attention over the years and is among Fuller's lesser seen pictures. Combining aspects of a costume picture, crime film, thriller, and romance, the movie is admittedly hard to categorize, and the complexity of Revis' forgery plot can leave first-time viewers resigned to confusion. Two aspects of the narrative, the frame story and the characterization of Revis, pose particular difficulties for the film's reception, as the first gives the plot away and the second challenges plausibility, which I think sums it up quite nicely, really.
Yeah, basically.
It's what would you call, what's the phrase? It's a curate's egg of a film, but probably a curate's egg that's on the turn. Yeah. And it just says it played first run houses, so it went out as a first run to fair returns through June, eventually limping towards a disappointing 1 week run at the Palace and appearing in the bottom half of first run double bills by July. So it kind of damp farted its way onto the yeah. And there's not a lot written in the Dabrowski book about it comparatively.
Something that concerns me slightly about this, about what you're saying, this being one of his less seen films, and referring to it as this kind of damp fart, which it kind of is the fact that when you look at Sam Fuller's directorial career on Letterboxd by popularity, which is the films people are watching and logging, it's about mid-pack. So like half of his films are less well watched than The Baron of Arizona, which I'm slightly concerned about.
That is possible. That is possibly a red flag, but don't underestimate the price factor. You know, the price is right.
I guess as well. This one I was able to watch on Criterion Channel, for example. So this one, unlike a lot of them, seems to have some sort of distribution, which some of them don't, do they? Some of them are harder to find. I think
some of them are really hard to find. Yeah, I mean, looking at.
I know you had fun looking for Dead Pigeon on Beethoven Street.
We'll save that story for the. But looking at the same selection on Letterboxd, that comes right before Run of the Arrow, and Run of the Arrow is a banger.
Okay, interesting.
Run of the Arrow is really tight, almost kind of cross almost between like Apocalypto and Dances with Wolves.
Yeah. Not what I thought you were going to say. I thought you were going to say like The Searchers or something.
No,
it's really interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's really good. Really tight 80-minute kind of bounding action thriller thing.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I'm trying to be generous to it, but it is difficult with this film, I think.
Yeah, there are things I liked. I mean, like a summary of things I like Vincent Price is not what's wrong with this film in any way, shape, or form. He's very good. He's very charismatic, and as you say, he kind of emotes really interestingly. He's got an interesting facial expression. He's got an interesting way of speaking. And I do appreciate that Fuller has now kind of got a slightly larger canvas. Although there are also points where you can see kind of him bursting at the seams of Lippert's budget, because like there's a bit where people are just in a carriage just on a normal flat road, and it's back projected, which at other points of the film it isn't. So I wonder if at some point they were doing reshoots or they just ran out of money or what. But that bit kind of stuck out. There's also a weird thing where, do you remember I said about I Shot Jesse James? There's a weird thing near the end of the film where Robert Ford is, every time he's in close up, it looks like he's in pitch black nighttime. And then you cut to daytime with the guy that he's kind of arguing with, and then back and forth between the two. The exact same thing happens in this. So I don't know if it's a continuity error or just something Sam Fuller does, but like all of the mob stuff is pitch black, it's nighttime, and then it'll cut to the carriage going towards where the mob are, and they're clearly going through in the day. And then it cuts back and forth between the two things. They're supposed to be happening simultaneously. Like he's riding to where they are. It's very, very weird.
I didn't pick up on that, much like I didn't pick up on it last time. So I think we'll
it's
keep
literally night and
day. Yeah, I mean, is there anything else? You got any other notes or anything?
I don't think so. I think we've managed to get through all my notes. I did enjoy the bit where there's this like Mexican gravedigger who he's bribed to as part of his scheme. And at one point, Griff, because this is the thing with Griff's an idiot. Like, Griff will just bring witnesses up, and rather than taking it to court or whatever, he'll just be like, I found this now. What do you think about this, Baron? Which is just a really weird way of doing it. So he takes the Mexican guy around to see the Baron, and he's like, what about this guy? This guy, you bribed him. And then the guy's obviously been gotten to by the Baron and lies and supports the Baron's story. And then Griff's like, you know, the dangers of committing perjury. And then the guy's just like, what is perjury? and then he goes like, he's bribed you, hasn't he? What is bribe?
I mean,
I did quite enjoy that scene.
There is more than one occasion where, as like a prosecutor or an investigator, he does virtually go up to Vincent Price's house and says, I've got this evidence.
I've got all this evidence.
Can you just have a look at it? Look after it for me.
Basically. And there is a kind of an ironic enjoyment in that. I do. This is the thing that this is the worst thing I can say about it. I know I want to find positives in it, but I keep coming back to negatives. The worst thing I can say about it, and this is the same about I Shot Jesse James, is they are the perfect length and they both feel too long. And that's weird that this is 97 minutes, and about halfway through I was thinking, oh my God, how much longer is there of this film? And that's not what you want with your 90-minuters.
No.
That's not what you want.
No, absolutely. I think I've got one last thing to talk about before we say goodbye to the Baron, and that is that Sam Fuller doesn't write much about this in his autobiography. This whole film, he talks about finding Vincent Price, and he talks about working with James Wong Howe, and he talks a little bit about the actual story itself, and that another use of the son of a bitch. He wrote Revis as an arrogant son of a bitch. But he does actually talk about his creative process as a director. So I've got here, the cameraman is master of his own kingdom. I feel the same about the rest of my crew. Sound technicians, makeup people, hairdressers, costume designers. We discuss the kind of picture that I want to make, then I give them ample freedom to get the job done. They always did, no matter what the budget or the time constraints. I was always lucky with my production crews. Preparation, resourcefulness, and perseverance were the keys to staying lucky. The Baron of Arizona wasn't a big success, but at least it was fun to make.
Okay, that's nice. More importantly,
I was becoming more confident as a director and earning some clout after in the movie business. There we go. And then he goes on to start talking about the steel helmet.
Interesting. So, like, apparently, I only found this on the Wikipedia page. I don't know how valid it is or whatever, but apparently Ed Wood worked on the Baron of Arizona. He was a stuntman. He was a stuntman, and he was involved in sort of choreographies of the stunts, which is interesting because it feels a little bit like it's more towards an Ed Wood movie than it is the Kurosawa stuff we're watching. And I've just looked at James Wong Howe on Letterboxd again. He was the cinematographer for a Fritz Lang film called Hangmen Also Die, which is an amazing title and which I will now watch. That sounds like a good one.
You just reminded me. I can't remember if it's this film. Oh no, we're 2 films away from that, but I've got another little bit of trivia when we get to Fixed Bayonets.
Okay, I'm interested. Like, do you know? Because I can't find it. The reason I was faffing around on Letterboxd just now is obviously you've talked about how he's talked about working with James Wong Howe, working with Vincent Price. I can't see any evidence he ever worked with either of them again through his filmography.
No, I don't think so. No, I mean, I think we will. I think does Reed Hadley turn up again? I don't think he's got a lot of
regular faces.
Regular faces. There are people that turn up in more than one, and we'll meet one of those faces in the next film. But he certainly hasn't got a Mifune.
No.
Just there are a few people that do make repeat performances, but it's not the same. It doesn't sound like he was particularly difficult to work with, although he was one of the pioneers of the shooting guns on set to cause people to either call action or to get people startled. So maybe people just didn't like having guns shot from behind the camera. It's possible. Yeah, but yeah, no, he doesn't have the same. Although, and Scandal Street. I think. What was the name of the actress? Ellen Drew. I think she turns up in Scandal Sheet, which is a film that is based on his novel, The Dark Page.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I think. But yeah, we meet our first regular in the next film.
Okay,
Yeah.
which I've seen.
Yeah. So yeah, actually, yeah. I mean, I couldn't remember exactly how many he turns up in, but it's at least 4. So yeah, the next film is The Steel Helmet.
Yeah,
which
we've
you've seen.
both already seen. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a little. Expectations is one thing, but we can't really preempt what it may or may not be.
Well, no, but what I will say about it is I'm excited to see it again. I remember it being very good. I remember it. My memory of it, and I only saw it like last year, but I'm in my going towards my late 30s, so that's the long time ago. So from my memory of it, it's a very muscular film. You know what I mean? Like this is what I imagine when I saw Steel Helmet, which I think was my first Fuller. It set me up to think of this guy as being very like masculine in a very kind of old-fashioned way, where he's kind of just like no nonsense, no bullshit. We're going to smoke cigars like men. I'm not going to give you a contract to be on this movie. We're going to shake hands, like this is the kind of a picture of him I have in my head. And Steel Helmet, I think, lives up to that sort of idea. Like it's very, as I remember it, very like no nonsense, no bullshit. No, I don't want to work with Gary Cooper or John Wayne. Give me this random bloke. We're making a movie about the real war.
I mean,
I like that about it.
I mean, not to give too much away for the next episode, but he did turn down Fox because they wanted to make it with John Wayne.
Yeah, that's what yeah, exactly. So it's yeah, I think this one I will be surprised, and I've not seen most of his films at this point. I will be surprised if any of the other ones are better than Steel Helmet. That's the best one I've seen out of the ones I've seen. You've seen more of them than me. Is it your favorite?
I think it might be the best, but I don't think it's my favorite. I think my favorite's coming up in a little patch, maybe sort of 3 or 4 films down the line. I kind of like his pulpy tabloidy stuff. But yeah, we'll talk about Steel Helmet in the next episode.
Between us and that, didn't you say there's another film we're supposed to watch as together with it? Is that Dogface?
No, that's Dogface. We'll save that for towards the end. We'll save that for Big Red 1.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I see. That's a short film. Anyway, yeah, that's me just getting confused about our business right here live. You get to see how the sausage gets made on the Auteur Limits. Yeah. Well, thanks for listening. Another enjoyable delve into the work of Samuel Fuller. I'm looking forward to revisiting Steel Helmet with you next time.
Yeah, 85 minutes of banger. There we go.
It is.
All right. See you next time.
See you next time.